Hated by some, dreaded by many, and loved by a few. University paper writing is one of those things that it just takes time to learn. It comes natural to some, I suppose, and I actually learned how to do it in such a way that I began to like it. It isn't actually a natural form of communication. It's pretty artificial, and it's something that we just have to spend time learning how to do well. My name is Brenton Dickinson, and I want to do a short tutorial on what I'm calling the anatomy of a research paper. I have often used some other metaphors like architecture and the lifestyle of a research paper, but I want to choose anatomy. And so I'm going to today use the word picture, the metaphor of a tree. I want us to think about this tree that's in front of us. It's a beautiful tree, I'm sure you would agree. And I want to just basically walk through the steps of what a paper can look like. Now, it's really important that we do this well. This is not just about getting marks, but this is about learning the framework of how to communicate something that we've learned clearly and effectively. Now, this research paper writing seminar is really just a first step. Once you've got the structure, the bones, the anatomy of a research paper, then you can go on and you can pull it apart and you make it more complex, or you can do all kinds of things. But I want to give here just the basic structures. This isn't actually much different than what some will have learned in a high school class, something called the 5-paragraph essay. But of course, I want us to move past that. I've had students actually who have given me papers that were like 10 pages long, and each of the paragraphs were 2 or 3 pages. So that may be somewhere in your background, or maybe you didn't learn really to write terribly well, or to write research papers well, or maybe you've been writing other things like, fiction or nonfiction essays, and the research paper just seems like a strange thing. Or maybe this is just new to you in general, and you want to take time to perfect and to make good papers that your teachers will love to read and that you'll love to make. Whatever your motivation is, you need to get kind of the bare bones of what a research paper is. And so I'm going to use this word picture of a tree, just because, I like trees. So there it is. That's the picture in front of you, and so let's begin with what the foundation of a research paper is. And actually, the foundation is, probably not shockingly, the foundation is research. I know, research. Research is the foundation of a research paper, and all research papers begin with a critical question, or maybe even a theory that you would like to try out. Whatever your question is, whatever your theory is, you need to go and find out. Sometimes this will mean doing something physical like research in a laboratory. This might be looking at something historically, or in what I'll talk about a bit today, this might be in close reading of texts. And so what you want to do is ask a question, or you want to find a path towards something that will be your main argument. So once you have a sense of what your topic is, you need to hit the books. Other tutorials will tell you how to research. This one presumes that you can go to the library, that you can get to your digital resources, and you can choose good resources, and you can compile good research. And once you have that good research and you're able to formulate an argument from it, something that you want to say, then you're able to move on. Papers are not, you do not write papers as you research, as you find things out. There will be terrible papers and difficult to read. You do all your research first, making great notes, and then you start to organize your research into something that makes sense, something that other people can read. So the foundation, the soil in which your tree is planted, is your own curiosity and your own commitment to research. So the thing you need is a thesis. You've heard of this before. This is a big idea, sometimes written as a single sentence, sometimes written as a couple of sentences, the basic argument of what you're trying to say. And after you've done your research, it's really actually important to sit back and say, okay, what do I have here? What am I trying to say? What is my main argument? What is the big idea of this particular paper? That's what your paper needs to address. Papers have an argument, even if the argument is, I found this out, or I think this is true, or the research shows that X and Y are true. So that's really key. You need to have a thesis. There isn't a paper at an academic level that doesn't have a single organizing idea that makes the paper work, or else it's just not a research paper. It's not a argumentative essay. It's not a undergraduate paper that I'm talking about. Now, you've heard that the first paragraph has to have your thesis statement. Somebody has told you that probably in your research, and that's just not necessarily true. However, with beginning writers, if you're new to this, I think it's really good as a first draft practice to make sure that you have a well sculpted first paragraph. Now, what does the first paragraph, what is it made up of? Okay, so first, your thesis is what you're going to argue and how you are going to argue it. So here I'm trying to push you past a little bit of what the thesis statement is. It's not just that, you know, unicorns are really alive in Central Park. That would be an interesting thesis if you could demonstrate it, but that unicorns are really alive in Central Park, and I'm going to give you these different kinds of evidence that will demonstrate that what I'm saying is true. That's your thesis statement, right? It's actually the whole thing. A thesis statement, the reason we move past just the idea of one sentence to something fuller is so that you get a chance to communicate what you want to say. I actually, if you're a beginner to the project, I love to see from beginning student writers a first paragraph that has some sort of a hook that brings me into the paper. Please don't begin with, Huntington was born in ... Don't start like that. Don't start with in today's society. These are terrible beginnings that have been used thousands of times. These are the it was a dark and stormy night version of academic paper writing. Instead, start off with a question, a fact, a query, some kind of controversial statement, a quotation, some kind of interesting idea that hooks me in and then sets up a problem that you're going to address. For example, why is it that medieval maidens have been flocking to Central Park? Well, okay, they've been flocking to Central Park in New York City, in Manhattan, because of course there are unicorns that exist in Central Park. So this is the kind of thing that you can use to set up your argument. And as you move further, your thesis statement is going to include what will later be your main points. I'm going to use 3 today because that kind of fits with that old 5-paragraph style of the introduction, the 3 main points, and then the conclusion. But your essay may have 1 point or 2 points or 20 points. It doesn't matter. But the main 3 points, So what is the evidence that there are unicorns in Central Park? When it confirms the folklore that's always existed, of that part of Manhattan. Number 2, we have photographic evidence, and number 3, we've DNA evidence. Okay, so this is the evidence that we want to say that exists to prove our point. Your first paragraph or your first couple of paragraphs can pull all that together. Now you may need, right after that, a paragraph that has some definitions, a paragraph that gives the ground rules for your research, gives the ground rules to the reader, some other hints or things that we need to know as background before you get into your main argumentation. That's pretty good. But within your first paragraph or 2, we want to see a thesis. We want to see that main idea, what you're going to argue and how you're going to argue it. Okay, so get that thesis out. Again, more advanced papers, more advanced tutorials will teach you how to break that down and then to rebuild your paper into something that's just a little bit different. Okay, so now that you know what you want to talk about and the main points, as you can think of them, once those have been written out and you begin to sculpt those into your introductory paragraph and page, what you want to do then is make sections. And each section then will have 1 or more paragraphs in each section. Okay, so the sections I've called point number 1, point number 2, and point number 3. These are the main branches of your tree, right? If the soil in which the tree is planted is the research, if the main trunk is your thesis and the main idea of your piece, then the main branches of your argument are what we want to look at today. And each of those will have a paragraph, and that paragraph will be made up of different things. Now, paragraph writing is actually a really neat lifelong skill to develop. And if you're a weak paragraph writer, then you need to spend some time working on it. I'm going to give you just a quick kind of a Cliff Note version of what you can do to write a paragraph. Okay, so I'm going to use see, we have these different paragraphs that are part of the section. I'm going to use in point number 1, I'm going to look at paragraph number 3 within point number 1 and TEA. That's it, TEA. So each paragraph will tend to have a topic statement. This is almost like a thesis statement of what the paragraph is about, because the basic rule of a paragraph is it should have one idea. Okay, now it may have like 3 different things that you're talking about, but in one paragraph they need to be all collected into a single idea. Right? That's really an important thing to be thinking about. Okay, often paragraphs are bad because students can't tell me what the paragraph is about. It takes the whole paragraph to say what it's about. And a great exercise to do is when you're writing a paragraph, after you've written it, you just take with a pencil, or you do it digitally, and you add kind of a line on the side, and you say, this paragraph is about, and then you fill in the blank. If you can answer that question, this paragraph is about, you can make that your statement. So in the case of the unicorns in Central Park, we'll tell first part is folklore, and we've been talking about different kinds of folklore. And this paragraph, for example, may actually begin to put some doubt on the folklore. So the topic statement may be something like, although there's pretty good evidence that the story of unicorns has existed for at least the last couple of 100 years in Central Park, there are some reasons to doubt that this story has any veracity. For example, and then you give E, your pieces of evidence. For example, all the evidence occurs in satirical magazines, right? Or there's actually a cult of the worshiping unicorns, and they don't tend to be very grounded in reality, and we may want to rethink what they're saying. Or it could be that really somebody went and changed the evidence, and wherever the word horse was written, the word unicorn was placed in instead. Whatever your piece of evidence are, after your topic statement, you then want to lay out your evidence. This is where you give your evidence. And there's 3 kinds of evidence that you can use that are really part of any particular research bit. One, statistics, stories or studies. Okay, statistics would be statistical analysis. So in this case, I don't know what statistics on unicorn sightings would be, but some sort of statistical analysis. Number 2 are stories. In this case, we're talking about folklore, so this is where we're looking at. And then 3 would be studies. These are academic research pieces, right? In the case of literature, we also can be looking at the story itself, the poem, the details on the page, the thing that's in front of us, the data that we want to consider. That's what the evidence is made up of. Okay, so it's helpful when you're thinking about literature to think about the thing that's in front of us that we're analyzing, or the scholars that we're working with to help us analyze it, or in the case of other kinds of things, the 3 S's: stories, studies, and statistics. Okay, that's your evidence. So you've got your topic statement, then you kind of lay out your evidence within the paragraph, 1 or 2 or maybe 3 things. We don't want paragraphs to get too unruly. And then finally, you give some analysis. This is where you summarize this paragraph up. So, after giving your little bits of evidence on why there may be reasons to doubt the legend, you may want to say something like, that said, the weight of the evidence still falls upon legendary suggestions of unicorns in Central Park, or we can't be conclusive about these legendary statements, so we need to look for other evidence. You need some sort of analysis to bring that entire paragraph together. Okay, TEA, topic statement, evidence, and analysis. I also like transition statements. So that's why I like paragraphs, especially in new sections that begin with while or although or in accordance with or continuing that idea, something that brings the paragraphs together so that your paragraphs have kind of a flow. But for now, make sure you work on good paragraphs. They're like the Lego blocks of your particular wall that you're building. Okay, so topic statement, evidence, and then finally analysis gives you the entire paragraph. That paragraph is part of a cluster of paragraphs that will be the section that you're working on. And then of course, there are different sections in the paper. In this one, there's 3 different sections, and ultimately those will fit together so that you'll end up with something like an introduction, right, which includes a hook, something to draw the reader in to set the conversation up, some sort of way of thesis statement that guides the reader, and maybe some background material. So the introduction, then the various points, which will be sections in the paper, and then a conclusion that brings it together. And this is the interesting thing, but the conclusion is kind of a mirror image or a reflection of what's happened before. I don't want you to restate everything you've said, but bring together what you've said into a coherent whole. Can you summarize the entire paper in a conclusion, in a single paragraph that restates your thesis, that emphasizes the critical points? That's what a conclusion is. Don't bring in something new. Okay, further on in your writing, you can talk about the things you didn't get to, the literature or the studies or the scientific analysis that you would like to do. You may want to point to things that could happen out of this. And now that we know that there's possibilities of unicorns in Central Park, it might be wise, to guide even more maidens to Central Park, or to keep bad guys away who would drink unicorn blood, or to I don't know, to do a scientific analysis of the unicorn and find out what was their ancestry and how that beast came into being. So there you can point to other things, but it's really good as a basic writing to stay tight with what you've done and don't give us new stuff in that conclusion. The reality is, what's really kind of interesting about writing a conclusion, as you're writing a paper in the early stages, and even later as a professional writer or as an academic writer, you often find that after you've written your conclusion, that's given you another chance to rethink your paper. So I suggest students make a provisional thesis statement at the front of their paper, do all the work of it, do some of the editing, and then after writing that conclusion, come back and relook at the thesis statement to make sure that it's accurate. Have you actually said what you're going to say? Because that's the basics of what a paper is, right? Say what you're going to say it, and then say what you said. That's it. That's kind of the structure of it. That flow of things. It sounds redundant. It is actually. We as professors who read a lot of papers love as students advance in this art and begin to do creative things and actually, throw that framework around or expand it out to the edge. But until you've got your feet, this is a great way to do it. And of course, no matter what, understanding the anatomy, understanding the way the research paper works is really critical. Say what you're going to say it, and then say what you said. If that's the way you like it, then that's great. Introduction, a series of sections of argument, conclusion. If that helps you do that, okay? And the reason is the structure of a paper is critical. The structure is critical. Now, there's an apocryphal story. I don't know if it's true, and so giving sort of names doesn't really help. But there's an apocryphal story, probably a legend, maybe even a Central Parkish kind of legend, about a architect, an engineer who was sort of lost in his work, and he was sitting on at his desk in his living room, and he's working. He's got all these big textbooks. Think 19th century. These big fat textbooks are all kind of sitting around, and he's doing his work, and he's got his budgie, his bird, sitting in its cage on the side of the desk, in one of those kind of square cages that they used to keep Birds in. Okay, so his wife comes into the room and she begins kind of dusting and moving books along. And then she picks up like 3 big heavy books, 12, 15 pounds of books, sets them on top of the bird cage. And the architect then is a scientist. And so instead, looks over the bird cage waiting to see what will happen, because now there's, 15 pounds of books in a bird cage that is only made up of, 10 or 12 ounces of wire. What will happen? And so he waits and looks over to watch to see the bird get crushed by the books. He's a scientist. This is what they do. And what fascinated him, of course, was that the 12-ounce cage was able to hold up 12 pounds of books without crushing the bird. And in that moment, that architect, that engineer, invented the skyscraper, the idea that the structure can be a lot lighter than the building upon which the frame is set. So that you can actually build super tall buildings because you don't have to have an incredibly heavy frame. It can be much lighter than the building itself. And that's what a paper is like. If you can actually understand how the structure of a paper works, then you can actually build a lot in a paper. You can do a lot in a paper. And basically, I've written a PhD thesis, which is 100,000 words long, 250 pages. Okay, and it is basically this. It's basically this outline. Main idea and setup and the rules of the game, then a series of sections that give my arguments, and then I bring it all together at the end. It's the exact same as this. Now, it's not all the writing I do. I write popular journal articles, popular magazine articles. They don't look like this. They actually look more like journeys, where you come back to where you began or you end up somewhere new. I also write blog posts, which also don't look like this. I do lectures, and they don't look like this. But when I do certain kinds of academic papers, this is still really helpful to me. Now, if you want to think of it as the anatomy of a research paper or the architecture of the research paper, whatever you want, my son tried to get me to do the Lego building blocks of a research paper, where each Lego piece was a word, and the Lego piece sit in lines, which are the sentences, and the sentences are part of a wall, which is a paragraph, and then the different paragraphs become the walls, which are the building, which become the paper as a whole. And that's great. That would probably be a better tutorial. I'll let him do that when he's a little older. But hopefully for now, this can help you with the basics of what an academic level research paper looks like when you're writing. As soon as you get this down, this might take you a few papers, you can begin to play with it. But do talk to your professors to find out what they're looking for, because each professor tends to have a different way of how the language should go, or how playful you can be with the form, or what kind of research you want to do. Finally, make sure you read the instructions well. How often I've read what was kind of an interesting paper that turned out to be not at all what I assigned. This happens often enough with creative students. So make sure you're doing the project that you want to do, so that you don't have to repeat the project or spend a lot of time reconfiguring it or failing the project. Okay, it's essential that you get the rules of the game. All right, if you have any questions, you can always reach out to me, brentondickerson@hotmail.com, or through my school address. And you can find me on my blog, www.pilgriminarnia.com, or on Twitter @BrentonDana. If you have any ideas, I would love to hear them. If you have any questions, make sure you follow up with them. And hopefully this tutorial lays out for you the basics of what the structure or the anatomy of a research paper is like.